So this panel is a first for us. And the reason that it's a first is because the topic is one that's, I think, has tangential relationships with the broadcast industry for many years. And what I mean by that is in my time at Turner, of course, we bought a lot of professional gear from the usual broadcast vendors that you would know. But there were an awful lot of times when, you know, you would have an engineer come and say, you know, we've got this gear downstairs in an audio suite or in a, you know, in the field, and somebody went out and bought some of this. It's not consumer gear, it's a step up from that. And now it's a part of their workflow. What should we do? And, you know, the answer is, well, we needed to work that into our workflows and into our processes. And so I think for a number of people that have worked in the kind of the broadcast industry, if we can call it that, we have experience with Pro AV, but this presentation, I think, is more to introduce Pro AV generally, talk about the market, so that our attendees who might be like myself, who might have a passing acquaintance with it, or may have no real understanding of what the Pro AV market is, so that they can start to get an understanding of that. And then also, we've got some work going on both within the VSF and the AMWA around Pro AV, and we're going to explore some of that as well. So I'd like to start by having you guys just introduce yourselves and your company, and just say a few words about what you guys do. So Andrew, could we start off with you, please? And welcome to the VSF. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Andrew. I'm the Director of Product Management for Macnica. And my history has been in kind of a wide array of Pro AV spaces, including kind of not for broadcast TV. When I started off at a cable access station in the States, and then later on in the Pro AV market, making and selling digital signage systems, and also doing some integration work for some integrators. So Pro AV has been in my history, but we always went to NAB, and that was kind of where the cool kids went. So I have a roll up to the broadcast side of it too. So
great. Well, it's great to have you here, and look forward to this panel. David, please introduce yourself and your company and say a few words.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. I'm the Vice President of Research and Development for Matrox Graphics. Matrox Video now, if you guys have seen those updates on our website. And Matrox has been a broadcast supplier for a very long time, but maybe less known to this crowd, a Pro AV supplier as well. And we've been around the industry for a long time, supplying unique solutions across both camps. And I've been at Matrox for 25 years and been able to see quite a bit of that evolution over that time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Karl, you're the, well, maybe with me, but as the moderator, I kind of reserve to hold myself out here. You may be the one that, you know, which one of these is not like the others? I think everybody here would know you as, you know, a hardcore broadcast engineering type person. If people haven't specifically heard you speak, they certainly have read a lot of your articles in the journal and other places. But actually, you guys have a pretty deep connection to Pro AV, which a number of people may not know anything about. Would you like to say a few words about that, and also maybe introduce yourself for those people that don't know you?
Sure, I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Brad. I'm Karl Paulsen. I'm officially the Chief Technology Officer of Diversified, which the name sort of fits the application. We have a diverse set of applications that we use throughout the company. And oddly enough, we're probably most known for the media and entertainment space, building stadiums and studios and networks and things of that nature. But over the course of doing that, we also have a very deep influence into and applications of the Pro AV market. So probably an equal amount of volume to the kinds of work. It's just different types of work. Things like boardrooms and hospitals and houses of worship and places of that nature that use a mix of both professional broadcast equipment, as we tend to call it, and professional AV gear, everything from LCD screens and then LED type screens, things of that nature, anywhere from little small studios all the way to things like the Samsung screen that's in Times Square. We're involved in all sorts of those kinds of applications. So it's interesting to watch over the course of the last 5 or 6 years as the 2110 environment standardized networking capabilities for broadcast and professional services. And now we're digging into the Pro AV world, where there's just kind of a plethora of different ways of doing things that sort of need a common format. And I think that's the whole idea behind this panel, is to look where there's commonalities between them.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Karl. Thanks for that. So I want to ask you guys, I think maybe certainly for myself with the Atlanta Braves and you know, a lot of broadcasters will be familiar with in-stadium stuff and the jumbotrons and all of those sorts of things. But maybe Andrew, David, what are some other areas of Pro AV that we might not think of that are squarely in that Pro AV market space?
Which one? You want to go first, Dave?
Go ahead, Andrew. No problem.
Well, I mean, the one that pops up in my head quite often, well, there's two I'll mention. One is, you know, there's college campuses, but also even K-12. You know, you've got many facilities that these or, you know, both college campuses and K-12 schools have, and they have Pro AV in every single room. They've got digital signage everywhere. They have, you know, conferencing that goes on. They've got conference rooms that happen. They've got auditoriums, and they're doing live productions. So you know, both of those are good examples. And then also hospitals too have a real intense need for Pro AV. When you think about patient care and the video distribution that goes into the patient rooms and then the common areas as well. Those would be my two examples.
You know, we could easily add a few. There is digital signage and information display. Probably sucks up a huge market all on its own.
Yeah, David, I think if you let me interrupt you on that, I think we hear that term quite a bit, but it's not something that we do. So can you take just a moment and define what that is, and how can a few plasma screens at a bus stop be that big a business?
Well, if you think about the number of bus stops in North America, right, or the number of bus stops in the world, or just in one city, so bus stops or metros, train cars, airplanes, airports, everywhere you walk around these days, you see information. You consume it visually. And video is way more appealing than the static signs that were there from before. So, I mean, digital signage, whether it's retail or it's any of these information displays, or it's bar, restaurant, or hotel, it's huge and it's everywhere, and it's permeates and it grows every year. Not this year, but every normal year.
Every typical year.
Every normal year, it grows.
Exactly.
And huge interactivity too. With that.
Interactive digital signage, kiosks, mapping, all the things that we take for granted that we see all around, and they just go invisible because we've gotten used to it. And then, of course, things like control rooms, to contrast it, completely different. There's a broadcast control room, but there are control rooms in every single industry, and they heavily use the Pro AV equipment inside of them. Everything from a 911 call center, which there are several per city, to disaster recovery, energy, oil and gas. I mean, it just goes on and on. So in terms of size, this covers, as Karl pointed out, sorry, a very, very broad, diversified market.
So like, what, it's twice the size of our market?
Well, depending on which studies and you know how
Yeah.
studies can be, but the last one that I remember is $245 billion approximate estimation, specifically for like this land-based video distribution we're talking about. There's about 6 million units per year shipped. Not all of them are land, some of them are coax and other medium, but all of that is moving towards IP. IPMX is looking to place a standard to help guide that space.
So Andrew, what about the size of that, of the
Well,
Pro
I was just
AV
gonna, I
market?
remember Cisco putting out a paper, you know, kind of in the early days, they were projecting a $500 billion market. But I mean, I would just echo what Dave's numbers sound more believable, but it's hard to, you know, overemphasize how big that market is. And when you think of digital signage, it's everything from the little gas station player, but you also have like really sophisticated AI based machine learning or you know, machine vision kind of systems where they're dressing you while you're standing in front of it, and all of that takes really low latency. And I think that there's just a lot of use cases in signage and in Pro AV generally where latency is a big deal.
Sure, sure. And I think that that is just one thing that points out that the user requirements in Pro AV, we really need to look at those with a fresh look rather than starting with our requirements. But Karl, this sounds like a pretty big market to me.
Yeah.
Compared to us.
And in addition to what's just been explained, maybe from the consumer facing part of it, there's an entire new infrastructure, other infrastructure rather underneath it. For example, in our portion of digital signage, we have close to 500,000 touch points or endpoints that we manage from 3 different knock locations across the US, all over the world. And if you think of it about just managing the software alone in that, not to miss the parts of contributing the content and taking care of the problems that arise as a result of the fact that it's gonna go bad at one point in time. That's an entire business segment for our operation that's fed by both the Pro AV side or the AVE side of our company, as well as the M&E side of it.
And so all of these operations, and this is not a knock on this market at all, it's just me asking a question to learn. So all of these operations, I assume, well, sorry, this is how it looks like inside of my brain. It's kind of a mess. I think if you talk to any broadcast engineers, they would tell you that it's tough and that their staff, especially if you're talking to engineer managers, they're going to tell you their staffs have been cut. The number of people that they have who are technically, you know, really expert and could build a facility from the ground up, you know, it's not like it was. So what's it like in terms of the end user in this Pro AV environment? Are we talking about, you know, someone who owns a Pro AV company and they, you know, they get in a van and they go down to, you know, just to pick something, Best Buy, and they buy some top end stuff from that store and they load up the van and they go to the conference room and start putting this stuff in? Or are we talking about, you know, large kind of end user, not end user, I guess it would be more installer companies that have full up design teams that are designing big things? What does this look like kind of from the I guess it would be customer standpoint for you guys?
I think you hit it right there. You hit both ends of the spectrum, Brad, by describing the difference of levels of requirements from the design or the integration perspective all the way to the consumer trying to do it themselves. Smaller organizations, a small coffee shop system is not held back at all from using a lot of the open capabilities of systems that are available freely and can put a system in themselves. Would someone like Bank of America do that for their banking? Probably not. So that's the two extremes, and both of them use digital signage and use Pro AV technologies to do that, all the way to boardrooms, for example. Very, very sophisticated, $1 million plus up boardrooms where you're trying to impress your client, or at least it's been that way in the past. We're going to see where this all goes once we come out of COVID, but you know, there's constant renovations and improvements being made across the board, and that leads all the way to the product development and innovations that come from companies like Matrox and Macnica.
So, Karl, it would be inappropriate to just assume that all of these Pro AV installations are just cheapo installations with low-end kit. It sounds like if you're talking about a boardroom at Coca-Cola or you know, a boardroom at Facebook or whatever, this is no hacked together thing, right?
No, I think when the chairman of any of the aforementioned companies wants to stand up and address either a group or their entire organization, they want to be as though they were sitting in the room right next to them. They want to be able to get the same experience from both directions. So that means large screen capabilities, broadcast level quality, cameras, microphones and sound systems that are equal across the board. So, I mean, a lot, if not all of the same kinds of technologies that are done to putting the 5 o'clock news on or a network news are applied to the Pro AV world. It's just a different structure. And one of them, if you want to look forward to where media and entertainment is going, they have 10 to 100 gigabit switches, and most of these facilities are built on sub 1 gigabit switches. So there's a monumental difference in the technology to deliver those, and frankly, they've been doing it for a lot longer than probably the professional broadcast world's been doing it.
Yeah, sure. Good point. And you know, I think a key point here, which actually has come up in the VSF IPMX group, is that these people are not going to be going out. Well, maybe Coca-Cola would, or Facebook would, or whoever, but most of these people are not going to be going out and buying $20,000 network switches, you know, a stack of those, and you know, building their networks. So there is some gap between what we have in the IP domain and what that maybe their requirements are. So we've got Macnica and Matrox here, and Karl, in a way, you represent an integrator user in this space. But I get the impression that this is a very crowded space. There are a lot of products, there are a lot of different offerings, and there are quite a few companies in there. And so I'm sure that there are probably more than one de facto standards or proprietary standards or whatever in this space. So David, Andrew, do you want to comment on kind of the size of that somehow? Can you guys characterize that in some way?
Let me jump in on this one first, Andrew. There are easily 100 or more companies that are offering their own proprietary solution. It's one of the issues. They've each developed their own way of having a round wheel, and everybody does it on their own, and zero interoperability, lots of fragmentation. The reason that can exist is because there is volume, and it's because there's lots of micro niches. So players tend to play in these little places so they can kind of defend, and not everybody attacks all of them.
Yeah.
That's why this exists. There isn't as much of a broad spectrum view. However, the point is IP really does change it, and when done correctly allows you to build unified product that looks at the whole big picture, and interoperability becomes even much more important and more valuable in this space, where it came from simple wired connectors with no feedback. That's really, really come a long way since then, but the mentality hasn't kept up.
Yeah.
So that's why the need for the standard arises, because we don't need to keep reinventing those wheels. We need to focus on trying to provide a standard that drives everybody in a single direction and take all that energy and add it on top rather than reinventing the bottom.
Well, it sounds like if there are 100 different proprietary ways to do things, that Karl over here is I suspect, trying to hold on to as much of the hair he has as he possibly can. And this is a quick way to lose some more of it. You know, just trying to make different things work together, because I think I can suspect that the reality is that somebody who is, you know, responsible for setting up a chairman's boardroom is going to say, I want this, I want that, and I want this. And, you know, Karl's going to be stuck with trying to get those different flavors of things to work together. It sounds like a pretty tough order, really. Andrew, how would you characterize that? We heard David say there's, you know, 100 different ways of doing things.
Well, I would think he hit the nail right on the head. I would maybe just add that when in the Pro AV market, I mean, we'd all love to get the Coca-Colas and all that, but the meat of the market is much smaller customers, right? And the staff might be not as savvy. And what you find a lot of times in Pro AV is they're not asking for, you know, this brand or that brand. What they want to see is video on that screen, and they want a very nice user interface, and they're really looking at from the perspective of what the output of the video is, or what the output of the sound is, and what the user interface is. And the Pro AV installer is able to make a user interface, a touch panel, or nowadays it's, you know, use your iPad, and they're able to kind of make that video system customize and work for them. And they're not really asking deep questions about interoperability or things like that. So as a result, there isn't a lot of customer pressure at the beginning, you know, for interoperability. But if you dig into integrators, the vast majority of them are really looking for a lot more, a lot less confusion and a lot more flexibility, and you know, the things that a standard kind of brings. But there are still some that look at this standard as being kind of the end of the fiefdom, or the end of the walled garden, and the beginning of a new commodity era, where something that was highly profitable and hard to understand is now going to become something any idiot can buy at Best Buy. So there's that, you know, kind of a mixed feeling there.
Well, it sounds like there's a range anyway, you know, that you've got people who are just, you know, going to the internet and ordering some specifically Pro AV stuff and trying to hook it together. And you've got companies that got full up engineering staffs that may be larger than what a lot of broadcasters have to put this stuff together. But for sure, it seems that there's a much larger requirement that I just plug the stuff together and it works. And I think we can look at a number of consumer interfaces that have had issues over the years, and you can kind of pick your one. But this is not really a case where we need something like that. One observation I'll share with you is that I think that you guys may or may not know, the VSF spent 2 years and about $500,000 worth of collective time and resources to come up what is essentially 2110 and PTP. And this organization was the progenitor of TR03 and TR04, which went to the SMPTE. And so this is not a knock on that work or any of the experts who are in the room here, and literally there will be the people that built it here today. But that is the gold-plated solution, frankly. If you want to do the Olympics, if you want to do World Cup, if you want to do an NFL game on IP in a professional way, that's the way you do it. And if you want to hire Karl and you want him to build you a really top-notch facility, you can do that and he can build that for you. The issue is that covers what I like to characterize as kind of the upper right corner of the market, right? And that I don't know, Richard Friedel had to step out for a minute. I don't know if he's back in the room, but Richard is now doing a lot of work with TV stations, and he has commented that, you know, it's difficult to have the sort of support and the sort of staff that you have now in television stations, and I think the same could be said in maybe college sports departments, who can either afford to or have Karl's knowledge to build you know, what might be a relatively simple podcast facility based on IP and PTP and 2110, and really be able to get it to work. And that's just the fact. 2110 is extremely solid. It produces great pictures, but it's not, you know, it requires some specialized network infrastructure, and it's not what you would characterize as plug and play. So I think from my perspective, if the VSF and the AMWA and the SMPTE were working together, and with our colleagues at the EBU, if they have some specific broadcast side user requirements to put into this, and we can look at the Pro AV user requirements, there's a potential here. I'm not saying it will happen, but there's a potential here to end up with something that fills the kind of the rest of that page of our market, and in an ideal world also meets your requirements. So we'll see if we're successful. But I wanted to share something with you. If you guys look at your screen, you can see this. But I do like this cartoon. It says, how standards proliferate. See AC chargers, character encodings, instant messaging, ... right? Situation, there are 14 competing standards. Person A says, 14, ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use case. Person B says, yeah, soon. Situation, there are 15 competing standards, right? So I think that the VSF, the AMWA, and the SMPTE, I think, are interested in engaging with the Pro AV area. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Brad.
Hey there. And please join our discussion here.
I'm trying to follow. I came on just as you mentioned my name, but I missed what preceded it. So I'm trying to figure
well,
out
I'll come circle back around to it in a second. So, but the question, I think, is, you know, how do we avoid just being not, now there are 15, but now there are 101 different ways of doing it. And what we've worked on has like 0.01% of the market. But before I ask you guys to do that, let me just circle back around to Richard. So what I was saying, Richard, is that the 2110 PTP NMOS solution is kind of the gold-plated upper right corner World Cup, you know, NBA type of system. But that I believe you had said that for broadcasters in a broadcast station, it was just very difficult to, frankly, impossible to implement given the complexity and lack of plug and play right now. And in an ideal world, we end up in some place where the intersection of the needs of your folks and the needs of Pro AV people who need something that's based on this technology but easier to work with, that those line up.
Yeah, look, I hope you're wrong about it being impossible, because we are building a station in Washington right now, as you know, that is
Yeah, but
2110 based.
You've got some help. They're not doing it by themselves.
No, that's correct. But
yeah,
you know, I agree with what you said. It may be slightly overstated in that, you know, I'm old enough
work
to
with
think
me,
back
man.
to,
It's a panel. Hey, psst, it's a panel. Work with me, and we need to be controversial.
No, I'm going somewhere. Just let me go.
Okay. All right.
I remember back, you know, when SDI was first invented. Some other people here will too, and it didn't plug and play either, right? In the early days, it took, and someone have to help me, 3, 4, 5 years until it really became sort of plug and play, and the ability for just pretty much anybody to figure it out. And in fact, it probably took a little longer. I mean, I even remember having to tell people, you know, because it was at the network, I said, well, how long or how big is the room you're going to put this in? Remember, there are cable length limitations and things like that that people just didn't really know or appreciate. And to some extent, that's true here. Look, 2110 is hugely powerful and brings us huge advantages, but it is complicated, like anything new. People don't know sort of the ground rules, if you know what I mean. And John did a great job with TR 101, right? It's a great beginning. We just need more of those, and we need more practical experience. Look, this is going to be our first station to do 2110. We don't have 2110 anywhere in the television group. We do at the network, of course, and Fox Sports mobile units and things, but the station group, this is a new thing. Now we'll rely on help from those people. And we're actually working with Fox News Channel as well, because they're going to do their first 2110 real implementation, but it's going to be a huge learning curve. And you know, these stations have 2 or 3 real engineers in them. They have other people called engineers, but we're lucky if we have 2 people that actually can do the math, to be perfectly honest. And they have to do everything. So they don't really have time to read all these standards and go through it. We have the same problem though with ATSC 3.0, right?
Yeah.
How do these guys become experts on all this stuff? And we as, well, me as the boss, I guess, but we as the industry hopefully will help them, which is why I participate in organizations like this to try to find ways.
Yeah, and it's not just a lack of knowledge. They may have the knowledge, but frankly, they're coordinating getting the oil in the newsroom trucks changed today, you know.
Yeah, they got to mow the lawn, clean the toilets, and keep the transmitter on there, as well as build a new facility.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
so
all.
It's not, that's all for now. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, figure out all this remote stuff with no advance notice for the whole COVID thing. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, Richard. So to the question, if we're going to help Richard and Karl and others, what's the chance that we're going to be able to get any uptake on this joint work that we're talking about here with the IPMX? I mean, just last week, people will be aware. In fact, Karl, I think you shot me a note about a presentation from HD-based folks in a SMPTE meeting. So, I mean, that didn't take long. So any thoughts about how we tackle this thing, or how we make the benefits of what we're doing great enough that we get some uptake? In a nutshell, does the industry need another standard?
I don't know if it's actually a standard per se. I think this is a guideline. I think this is narrowing the wedge down so that it can be put into the slots in the right order, so that there's some consistency in things, so that when a large corporation buys a number of other smaller corporations, which is not uncommon these days, and they want to all of a sudden connect all of these companies together, there's got to be some common framework. Today, there's not. And I'm reminded of a project that we were involved in probably 3 years ago now, where exactly that happened, and the adult in charge of the organization basically came to our company and said, how can I make it so that no matter who I talk to throughout the world doesn't have to go call in or call up an outside resource to come in and plumb the system back together? It works very well in one environment, doesn't work well with the next environment. And I think that's some of the foundational part of what's going on with the IPMX concept and the direction. No different than what we've heard in half a dozen other 3 to 5 letter acronym groups trying to do the same thing. Some of them have certain marketing derivatives or drives, and others have a real common thread there, in much the same way that the broadcast industry got together when 2110 and 2022 first came out. They said, we've got to play together nicely, so let's do interoperability testing. Let's try these things out together as a group. While at the same time, if you look at the Pro AV industry, they do a pretty darn good job of education among their people. And I think that's one of the things that has to come together from a harmonization standpoint, is get everybody onto the same playing field at the same time, playing from the same playbook, instead of 5 to 10 to 100 different versions of that. So, I mean, I think that's the foundation behind this, in my opinion.
Guys, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I love the education angle there, Karl. I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think we have a chance to become the source of how educating people on AV over IP as opposed to educating people on a particular technology. And I think that's a great opportunity for us. I would add a couple things. I think that, Brad, you brought up a great point about valence, and I think a few things. One is that we're going to have to be better than HDMI, but at the same time, not limit ourselves to thinking like, like cables. And one of the ways that we will do that is by really embracing the software only element and sort of going where others won't or will feel uncomfortable going. And so if we really kind of think about how can we give people the HDMI experience where they can plug in something and plug in a laptop, plug in a projector on a laptop and they see video. We really need to give them the dials to make this, we say plug and play, but sometimes they need low latency, sometimes latency doesn't matter. Giving them the dials to play with to dial in the quality and the cost and everything that they need to while making something that's, interoperable and understandable. And I think that, when I look at where's this going to come from? Is it going to come from Google? Is it going to come from IT? I think it should come from the group of people that made television happen. And, before computers came along and the platforms all got fragmented, video was just video. And same platform, we had that same opportunity. And all of these standards come out of SMPTE and VSF and AMWA already. I think they're, what I hear, and I know David has heard this about a million times on the trade show floor, people are just expecting a standard. They think it's going to come. They don't really know where. Nobody's really working on it. And I think if we can just go real hard and fast on this and get the easy, sort of the meat and potato things done, we can make something that is in the fight. And even if it's not like top of the line and every, checks every box against everything else, it being a standard is going to give us a real leg up.
David?
To add to Andrew's, it's true. I have heard it a million times, and I continue to hear it even during COVID times that people are expecting it, and I get lots of solicitation on IPMX. The thing is, I think broadcast needs to be really proud of the 2110 standard. Well thought through. It's maybe not simple, but that wasn't the mandate from the beginning, right? We were solving different problems. So now we want to take something that's proven. I don't want to recreate something. Now, Matrox certainly has 2110 knowledge, but the fact is it's as good of a standard as we could have expected, and it does graph really well to our view of the Pro AV world. It's missing some things, and that's what IPMX is all about. So how can we make the smallest amount of changes that help us get it to work? And now we'll have two industries driving the use of 2110. It doesn't need to be reinvented. It just needs some minor shifts, a little bit of change, and then your upper right triangle, or rectangle, sorry, becomes much bigger. And that's really the objective. And maybe we can promote it into other spaces. I know that there's a medical movement with mammography guys and video distribution guys that are looking at this as well. So the point is, we have a good, solid foundation. We need to build on it, make it easier, do the evolutionary step. And I think that there is a lot of pent-up demand out there in the world that would like an easier way, but they don't have that alternative. People are fed up of the, I was designed in, and now they no longer make that version, so I got to rip out all my gear.
Yeah.
I get it. It's driven by the IHVs, and I think one word that we keep missing, but I know we all know it, is the word open. So that's a big difference, is that we publish those specs. We tell people this is how it works. And it allows companies to go in and make that difference, find that flexibility. Anyways, I can go on and on for hours. The point is, I'm absolutely convinced, and everybody that I spend the time trying to convince really buys into the solution. Of course, they would like to see it happen because, unfortunately, there's lots of efforts that start and don't go anywhere. So, of course, there is some skepticism. That's up to us to overcome. And I think it'll really come to fruition when people start to see the product coming out and so on. And in order to get there, we have some details to iron out. That's why we need groups like VSF and AMLA and Sinti to help achieve that objective, right?
Yeah, thank you. So I think even though I've taken a kind of a contrarian position here, I want to be clear. Personally, I believe there's an opportunity that needs to be explored. There's work to be done. We need to be sure that the user requirements in the Pro AV space line up with the user requirements in the broadcast space. And we've already begun that process. And I don't think that's needs to be a heavy lift, a huge ongoing thing. It's just a sanity check, right? And if things make sense, I think there are some things that that we need to roadmap out so that we can tell people in a clear way, you know, this is the roadmap, David, to do the sorts of things that you needed, and here are the boxes that need to be checked. But I think if we do that exercise from a technical standpoint, I can tell you that the people that are in this room, the people that are participating in the AMWA and the people that are in the SMPTE, those people are the world's experts in this stuff. And I think if they understand the user requirements clearly, they can, I have a high level of confidence that they can deliver. And so I think it's up to us to work the process. The challenge for us always being open is to be timely, to be quite blunt. But I think that's just up to us to drive that. We do not have forever to do this, and we just need to get on this horse and ride and see what we can deliver. Gentlemen, we're out of time, but I thank you so much for participating in this. And I look forward to inviting you guys to other panels or to make technology presentations at future VSF meetings if you would like to do that. And welcome to the VSF. We really enjoy having you.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Karl, thank you so much for your time as well.
You're very welcome. Thank you.